Hello and good morning. So, first and foremost, I'll say this talk has been put together at top speed, and as a result, I don't totally know what the right pacing for this is going to be. The live is the rehearsal. But today, what I want to talk to you about is the kind of broad, interlocked set of challenges that I kind of expect we're all going to collectively face in the wake of very advanced AI coming along, and then not just the advanced AI itself posing an issue, but all of the things around it, the things that will change in the ecosystem as a result of its arrival, the kind of few dominoes down, and we'll get a little bit strange and look very far ahead, and I hope it's fun. So a little bit of background on me. I'm the head of mission alignment at OpenAI and have been for a year. In this role, I kind of do something that's not terribly unlike being an advocate for the public and an advocate for the mission in senior decision making. And previously, I was working on AI safety research at OpenAI for several years. Before that, PhD at UC Berkeley on deep reinforcement learning. And before that, physics and aerospace engineering at UF. Also, I'm a new dad. This beautiful baby is just the most wonderful thing in the world. Yeah, 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 yeah. We love babies. Um, and babies make it just so important to get the future right. Like you really feel a very special level of investment in making sure the future goes well when you know that people depend on it. So, okay, I also like writing sci-fi and fantasy. That's going to come through in this talk, and I am way, way, way too online, which is probably how I got invited here in the first place, since I was emailed about a Twitter thread I had written, and this will kind of expand on that thread. So yeah, this talk got away from me in the planning. This is like 40 slides. It's too much. You'll like it better when it's an essay later. And a couple of other asterisks. Um, I will try to sketch out a bunch of ideas and questions about what will happen sort of throughout the entire 21st century. So looking a few decades ahead, not just in the very near term. This will be very ambitious. We'll try to cover a lot of ground. Um, one of the main things that I kind of want to leave you all with is that many disruptive things will be happening at the same time, and if we want to get this right, we can't just hyper fixate on one of them. Um, we have to sort of look at the whole basket of things. We'll be relatively light on misalignment risk, which I expect a lot of you might naturally gravitate towards this as a critical topic. I do too, but like I said, there are a lot of other things going on at the same time, and I want to make sure to give them air as well. And furthermore, last asterisk, this is not an OpenAI point of view. This is very much my personal opinion, and it guides how I do my work, but it's not an OpenAI as an institution point of view. Okay, so this is the rough breakdown for what I want to talk about today. First, I will breeze through a case for why to expect that AI will have very significant impacts on the world in the near term. You have all probably gotten very familiar with those kinds of arguments already, so I'll try not to belabor them. Then I will discuss a number of disruptions that I expect kind of along many different axes of how the world works. I'll bring up a few questions that I think are important for how we contextualize what might be happening. Talk about the politics and the geopolitics of the 21st century because of advances in science and technology, not just in AI, but in other fields. We'll talk a little bit about some of the sort of stranger and more exotic ecosystem disruptions that might happen in the wake of AI. And then I'll try to introduce some concepts that I think maybe a handful of people have talked about over time in the AI space, but I really haven't seen anywhere near enough attention to this. What is our overall grand strategy, and what do we consider to be a good outcome from any of this? I rarely hear people fully dive into the details on what counts as a good outcome. We like kind of do question mark, question mark, question mark, aligned AI, the future is great, but what does it mean, and how do we make that a more rigorous and tractable question? So, the case for near term impacts. If you look at history, back in 2007, everyone knew that deep neural networks were too hard to train. And then a wide variety of miracles occurred, and now AI is smarter than people at most things. So, that was a cool less than 20-year stretch in which an awful lot of progress happened very quickly and somewhat unexpectedly. And there's kind of like a maybe one moment in here which is really worth zooming in on, which is that about 9 years after everyone knew deep neural networks were too difficult to train, deep neural networks had attained superhuman mastery at a strategic game that was expected to be pretty far outside the realm of what AI could do for several years to come, and it just unexpectedly came and totally dominated. So the big lesson from that point was that once you can turn a problem into something that you can apply deep learning to, you pretty much can do it as long as you've got enough compute. This is sort of a variant of the bitter lesson. Yeah, once you specify the problem well enough, get enough compute, it falls. And the big lesson from the 9 years that followed the AlphaGo moment was that it doesn't seem like there are any problems that are impervious to being formulated in this way. Basically, anything you can think of, it seems to be the case that you can specify it as a task for an RL agent in an environment, or in terms of a data set, you collect the data, you design the RL environment, you run it, you apply enough optimization pressure, and basically any problem seems to fall to this. And this is quite a profound thing. It really indicates we should expect, rapid progress in the near term. Um, but you don't have to just take the heuristic argument, uh, at face value. You can also look at a number of empirical relationships that have been observed quantitatively that are also telling that something very important is happening and happening very fast. Scaling laws exist, and this is quite remarkable that you can make some kind of empirical prediction about performance increasing as you increase the scale of what you're training. It's also amazing that this holds up not just for training time compute, but for test time compute. There are for the new kinds of models that exist for the reasoning models, ways that you can leverage compute not at training time, but at test time, where you just have them think for longer and they get progressively better results. This is a new scaling paradigm. So we have two scaling paradigms that complement each other. Uh, there are also these empirically observed trends for the length of tasks that AIs can autonomously perform, and the fact that this actually does kind of fit to a line is remarkable. I think Meter did something quite wonderful in putting this all together in this very easily digestible way. It's a quite forceful point that you can then extrapolate, and even if this is wrong, it still says something useful. Um, but yeah, maybe 5 years from now, AIs might be able to do things that currently take people a month of concentrated effort. And once that happens, once you kind of have that on tap and can just access that on demand, things probably are changing very, very fast and in quite disruptive ways. And of course, the investment in compute is massive and increasing over time, and the numbers that people use to describe how much they're going to spend on compute almost sound made up, except they're all completely serious. So I like this graph from Epoch AI where they estimated the total amount of computing power that was installed and available, and projected a trend for how fast it's growing, and it's growing quite quickly. So you put all these things together. We know that just based on the progress of research, there will be continued improvements in capabilities. We know that the empirical curve fits tell us approximately how much there is going to be improvement and that it will be consistent. And we know that any bottlenecks related to compute will probably be alleviated in the not too terribly distant future. So this altogether says, whoa, a very big thing is happening very soon. Um, okay, and now let's maybe get a little bit more granular. The way that I'm going to sort of pose what we'll talk about here is to point out a set of questions in a number of different areas where in each of them, if there were disruptions, you would say like, oh, wow, this is kind of a big deal. And the fact that they're all going to happen together at roughly the same time, I think collectively should make you go like, oh, wow, this is a very big deal. So first, just equilibria. We'll ground this in a concept of equilibrium. Um, when a system is in equilibrium and you perturb it, a couple of things might happen. Maybe the system has a natural restorative force, it'll go back to the equilibrium, depending on the size of the perturbation that might happen. But maybe the perturbation's too large, it doesn't go back to equilibrium. And maybe alternatively, it's not just a perturbation one time, it's a continuous perturbation. And then maybe there's no return to equilibrium at all. So the world has a bunch of equilibria. But like the world has kind of evolved this ecosystem of institutions, organizations, nations, patterns of operating that are all adapted to some underlying assumptions. So one assumption, first and foremost, is that most events in the world are happening because of people. People are very closely in the loop for decisions about what happens in businesses. They're in the loop for decisions about what happens in nation states and military contexts. They're deeply in the loop for all of the discourse that happens in our relationships in society. And so this is just a founding assumption that everything kind of unfolds at the speed at which people are able to observe the situation they're in, reach some kind of consensus together, take an action, and then respond to the actions that everyone else is taking. And that's a set of assumptions that will probably be challenged in a world where very advanced AI is doing a lot more of the things that historically have only been possible to have people do. So, yeah, many of the assumptions and equilibria that we depend on for relative stability in the world might change. And again, we depend on quite a few. We depend on law being relatively stable as a basis for businesses making long-term planning decisions. We depend on relative peace between nations as a basis for international trade and long supply chains. We depend on science and technology advancing at a particular rate, which is slow enough that it's kind of tolerable for society as a whole, where we only have something very controversial happening once in a while and only something as disruptive for international security as, say, nuclear weapons, maybe once in a very long while. But that might all change. So I'll talk for a minute about things that'll change on the social front. We don't quite know what's going to happen as AI becomes progressively more involved in how people socialize and in our day-to-day experiences. What it shapes about our opinions, what it shapes about our relationships with other people, whether or not people elect to have meaningful friendships or even romantic relationships with AI. I put this one here because I'm actually still a little shocked at the timing of it, but, the people always move the goalposts for AI, and circa 2021, people were saying that we would never have conversations, and then, ChatGPT came along, and of course, uh, in 2025, it'll be, "But it can't love you back." Kinda called it. That has happened. Yeah. Um, okay, but so this kind of thing happening, more and more people are going to feel like the AIs are basically real people. And that will, at some point soon, probably become a major, major culture war issue. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually see people looking at it as even like a civil rights issue. And this is not a statement about what should be. This is a prediction about what might be. And that'll be a very contentious topic. I wouldn't be surprised if within like 5, 10 years we see efforts at legislation on it. People running on platforms related to this topic. What is an AI? Is it a person? Is it a piece of technology? Is it a machine? What is the reasonable relationship that we should have with it? Also, this is just kind of commentary on the AI space. Uh, no one in the AI space seems to be talking all that much about religion, and I feel like that's a very weird oversight. I mean, most of the folks in the AI space are probably relatively agnostic, but most people in the world aren't. And that's going. There will be an intersection of AI with religion at some point soon. I'm very excited to see what the Vatican eventually says about all this stuff because they seem to actually have opinions about it that are well thought through and grounded. Um, but there will be disruptions in the social fabric as AI progressively gets involved in things like that as well. Okay. Of course, also, yeah, it's the economy, stupid. Like this is going to change the economy. I don't think any of us really fully know what happens to jobs. I think there is a very good basis for believing that in the long term, like, of course there are jobs, and of course people will find ways to do things with their time. It's astonishing that today there is a job where you play video games all day or play Magic the Gathering professionally. Uh, and these are things that would have been jobs 100, 200 years ago. So there will probably be something in the future that's equally strange to us as the stuff that we consider normal today was strange to someone from back then. But when transitions happen matters a lot, and this feels understudied. Actually, like shockingly and surprisingly understudied. There are a handful of economists who have really fully got their heads around this, and I'm thank God for them. But most of the country doesn't seem to be paying attention. Most of the world doesn't seem to be paying attention. They all kind of know nebulously that something will happen, but they don't seem to be reacting with urgency to figuring out the details of this. And when things begin to happen, we can expect that to be quite profoundly disruptive. We are already seeing what I think of as foreshocks, where you get the like the dock workers strike or the Hollywood Screen Actors Guild going on strike, and they're all uh, contentiously arguing points related to AI and automation. But I don't think we've seen anywhere near the full extent of the political backlash that will happen and the protectionism that'll happen when we have a better sense of what jobs might be susceptible to automation and when. Um, I don't think any of us really knows what's going to happen to goods. I mean, we all, I think, have some conception that one of the wonderful things about AI might be that it could enable uh, cheaply attaining abundance for a lot of the resources that people depend on. But no one seems to have gamed out how we actually get to that endpoint or what it looks like or when it's going to happen. I think there's clearly some blocking on robotics, and robotics is a hot topic where everyone is now actively researching it and spinning up robotic teams and building humanoids and all that. Uh, but we have to start getting answers to this. Personal guess, I think robotics will come online fully circa mid 2030s. Yeah. So the question was, is that just in terms of like pure robotic capabilities or capabilities plus the cost and distribution and rollout and integration? And I'm thinking the latter: cost, integration, rollout, etc. Practical robotics that are widely available circa mid 2030s. So a long push up till then, I think. There's also another set of questions I don't see people really talking about that I'm surprised by on what will happen with the AI agent economy. So, many people have done the imaginative exercise of saying, yeah, at some point we will all have personal AI agents that go out and advocate on our behalf and find products for us and bring them back and do the negotiation with whoever we have to negotiate with, and that'll be like a terrific product. Um, and we sort of say like this is good. It will be good. We don't really have a clear sense of what does the structure of the economy look like when there are all these agents that are out there optimizing for goals on behalf of people, and they start entering into weird contracts with each other and agencies to try to accomplish their goals. And maybe they begin making progressively more sophisticated agreements with each other that effectively create like a shadow financialized environment where deals that people can't follow, that may involve extremely complex risk portfolios that people have no idea how to begin assessing, but the AIs are advanced enough to do this. That might all just kind of come into existence. We have no idea how we would regulate that. We barely know how to regulate the existing stock market and the financial instruments that we've all decided we're going to have. When you have AI agents start packaging them in weirder and weirder ways and weirder slices and swapping weirder and weirder favors, uh, in untraceable negotiations across thousands of parallel agents. Um, like what what do the regulatory agencies do? And how do we make sure that the economy isn't susceptible to crazy flash crashes or the AIs doing things that we didn't realize they were doing? Someone's got to figure out how to study this. Okay, science and technology acceleration. So we've got the social stuff happening, we've got the economic stuff happening. At the same time as those things are happening, science and technology are probably beginning to move much more quickly than they've moved in the past. So is it the case that science today is going as fast as it could? Absolutely not. The number of scientists in any particular subdiscipline who are able to work at the frontier is tiny. In well-populated disciplines of science, you maybe have a community of a few thousand people who are doing as much as they possibly can. They also have massive communication overhead, so they're not absorbing knowledge as quickly as it's being generated. The results that would improve over where they are probably very high-hanging fruit. And a lot of the breakthroughs in science might depend on cross-disciplinary insights that a human scientist who has only ever studied one discipline is very unlikely to get to unless they happen to meet the right person at the right time who works in another area and they have a fruitful conversation. The mixing time for knowledge between disciplines is just terrible. Um, so there are a lot of reasons why the human apparatus of science is slow, to say nothing of public funding for science. which is a tragedy. This is the thing. A journalist was asking me earlier, what might I say that might not be good to say, and that might be the kind of thing. Um, but so AI is going to just get increasingly good at doing the kind of science at the frontier that currently only people can do. We see the beginnings of this today, where AI is making productive suggestions in areas of extremely advanced math and doing the kinds of things that maybe you would need a grad student to, think about it for a week in order to get somewhere. And in a few years, given that it's the explicit goal of Frontier Labs to push this very far, it's quite conceivable that we'll have uh, really advanced automated AI scientists 2, 3, 4 years from now that cause a lot of new technology to come into existence. Now, why is this a big deal? Uh, Technology actually creates the landscape in which decisions by businesses and decisions by states about national security outcomes are made. So if you are a nation and you're weighing your options in a security context, you know that you have a certain level of military technology available to you, and you know what measures you have, what countermeasures you have, what measures and countermeasures your adversaries might have. You make choices based on the things that you know about the state of technology on your side and on their side. If the state of technology is now rapidly changing, you don't necessarily know what your adversary has. Your adversary doesn't necessarily know what you have. You now have a signaling problem, and you have some risk of making a strategic mistake. So yeah, science and techno, and this is also, of course, where a lot of the great things will come from. I mean, advances in biology and medicine will lead to pretty extraordinary innovations on healthcare. This is wonderfully exciting, but yeah, so it's great, but it's also possibly destabilizing. And I'll talk a bit more about this shortly with some reflections on science and culture in the 21st century so far. Okay, I just talked a little bit about international security, but it's really worth driving this home. AI is becoming a critical instrument of national power. Security strategies everywhere are reorienting around it. Everyone understands that they have to have compute, that this is basically existential for them. And it's also the case that everyone is figuring out, how do we integrate AI for military purposes? And this is the kind of thing where, because it's new, because people don't know what the playbooks are, there's uncertainty, and uncertainty creates the space in which miscalculations can happen. Um, when I look at the global security environment today, I get a little bit nervous because there are a number of active conflicts that are, to some degree, proxies between much larger powers, and we don't know exactly where this is going to go. I don't know that there's a totally clear off ramp just yet. I hope that there's an off ramp, but it's conceivable to me that these conflicts might evolve, and that if there is instability created by the introduction of AI in national security contexts, that's a risk for the conflicts escalating. Um, so yeah, there are questions to ask here about, how do we improve signaling, and how do we revisit these escalation ladders, and get to the place where everyone is making good decisions. All right, this one is a side thought. I said this talk was overstuffed. Um, Another thing that's sort of destabilizing about rapid progress in science and technology. Quick show of hands. Who here is familiar with the vulnerable world hypothesis? Okay, terrific. Um, so yeah, maybe you begin discovering recipes for ruin much more quickly than you did in the past. Maybe you discover the kinds of technologies that uh, are extraordinarily risky. Um, and this really is a side thought. It doesn't totally belong in the flow here, but it did occur to me at some point that, okay, so you make the science and technology level go up, risk at some point spikes. It's been coming down for a while because you discovered cures, you made civilization more robust, so risk went down for a while. But now you step on the gas pedal for recipes of ruin, and maybe the risk spikes. But then at some point you find a fix for all the things that you accidentally broke, and risk comes back down again. And it feels like an open question to me, if this is like a true picture or not a true picture, and I would like for people to possibly poke at it, because this is part of the composite challenge of what's happening. We'll have the social disruptions, the economic disruptions, the security disruptions, and then we might also have additional incremental existential risk, not just from AI misalignment, but from other areas of science and tech, and we kind of need to know which picture related to this is true. Okay, a couple of questions from history that I wanted to pose. Um, the intelligence age is filled with a bunch of new things. AI seems quite different. It's probably worth it for people to study exactly how it's different. Um, because I've heard arguments kind of in all directions. Uh, on the one hand, compared to, say, the agricultural revolution or industrial revolution, what's happening in the intelligence age will probably happen much, much faster. Things where society reorganized itself and adapted to new technology in the past over the course of centuries or multiple decades. Now it might be in like 10, 20 years that we have to kind of grapple with these consequences. So that seems like a kind of meaningful difference. But then maybe you compare it to like the internet and computer technology, which also did touch on a lot of these things. It impacted society, it impacted international security. Uh, it to some degree accelerated science and technology. You can argue that maybe AI is a crisp example of the internet having accelerated science and technology. Publishing on archive probably made AI research happen faster than it would have otherwise. Um, but it does seem like AI is still qualitatively quite different. It would be good to get a handhold on that. Um, this question in the middle here keeps me up at night a lot. Does war create technology, or does technology create war? So if you look back at like World War I and World War II and what went super wrong there, certainly you see that there was a rapid deployment of new technologies into the battlefield with devastating effect, where chemical weapons became overused in World War I, and it was a totally new and unknown form of horror. In World War II, air power and nuclear weapons completely changed what was possible. I think there's a real question of to what degree did changes in technology prior to these wars shift the calculus of the nations in the decisions they made to go to war or to escalate something. I think there's something that should be studied in the historical example, and I would love it if people were drawing a direct comparison to what's happening in AI. Because if to really just get our heads around what's happening, we should study history. Um, and then there's a question of, okay, this whole other area that we'll talk about next. What advances will people culturally accept, and what form will rejection take? So this is going now into the politics and geopolitics of science in the 21st century. So I want to take a second and just think about a lot of different pieces of technology from the past few decades and what kind of reaction happened. I don't think we take stock on this cumulatively. There's kind of the meme that no one can build anything anymore, and we talk about this with respect to nuclear power. But actually, there are quite a lot of areas of science that were culturally polarizing, even if they conferred a meaningful and tangible benefit. And the backlash became legislation and division and people actually running on platforms about these things. And we should see this as instructive when we try to predict what sorts of challenges to anticipate in the next, several decades. So, like, cloning got straight up banned. Stem cells have now finally come around, but there was an entire development that had to happen where stem cells could be made from adult skin cells or something like that. And before that, embryonic stem cells were basically considered unacceptable for very understandable, legitimate cultural reasons. But it's just interesting that this, happens to whole tech categories, and it happens over and over and over again. Uh, and I bring this up because, okay, when we think about what sorts of technologies will come online beyond 2025 and what the AI driven acceleration in science and technology might enable, there are a few things we should look at, one of which is obviously transhumanism. What will happen as people become progressively more able to modify themselves? And this will be a super third rail topic. In a sense, it's already contentious. We know that people are having strong reactions to questions about designer babies and whether or not it's legitimate to genetically modify your offspring, even for things that are relatively uncontroversial, like preventing certain sorts of genetic diseases or conditions that are understood to adversely affect quality of life. It's also the case that Neuralink brain machine interface type things are in a very nascent stage, but give it 20, 30 years and that will probably be up and running. Uptake might be slow because I can't imagine that many people are going to let Elon drill a hole in their head, but some number of people will elect to do it. And at some point there will be less invasive ways of doing it. Um, And these will trigger cultural reactions at least as strong as the ones from previous technologies, but they'll probably be more significant because some of these things will create advantages for the people who elect to undertake them. Uh, Folks who decide to go down a path of self-modification in the vein of transhumanism, which again might be a very realistic possibility 20, 30 years, not that far off, um, they're going to be seen as having gotten some uh, illicit gains, basically, a performance advantage over others that might inspire envy and jealousy and backlash. And I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes the basis of some variation on a war or a conflict down the road. In my head, I have this meme, the crab bucket war, for when all of this winds up fully unfolding. When some group says we're going to go down the transhumanist path, and some other group says you can't do that. That's not right. Or you're taking something at the expense of someone else. That's a conflict to anticipate. And if we try to, plan for the century and plan for the challenges related to AI without thinking about these sort of second order consequences, I think we would be in error. Also, of course, it's entirely possible that there will be some rogue AIs in the world, and let's assume for a moment that all the frontier labs will, of course, do the super responsible things and implement their preparedness frameworks terrifically, and none of us will come up with a misaligned AGI. But it seems plausible to me that even if all of the major actors are responsible, something goes wrong, and at some point, some territory is controlled by an AI that wants to do something with it other than what people want to do. And then also space colonization. So we should think a little bit about what the politics of this are going to look like. So on Earth, we'll develop new technologies. There will be backlash against those new technologies. Some amount of it will be prohibited by law. Some number of people who are ultra libertarians are going to sign up to go with Elon to Mars, and they're going to start experimenting with the things that they weren't allowed to do on Earth and say, in the name of freedom, we have to pursue it in space. And there will be now some basis for conflict between the factions that have elected to go pursue their fortunes off of Earth and the factions remaining on Earth. This is gonna be weird, and it could conceivably happen, like, not that many decades from now. Okay, let's talk about ecosystem disruption. So I love this tweet. I love this. This is just terrific. This is what I'm on Twitter for way too many hours of the day. Um, but yeah, a self-replicating solar-powered thing that didn't rely on humans would be a miracle. It's possible, but imagining it doesn't imply that the probability is very hard. Touch grass, and one of the things that I love about this, aside from it just being chef's kiss perfect, is that it is a reminder that a lot of the things in the strange sci-fi future of weird replicators, nanites, paper clippers, etc., people don't talk enough about this. But what if it's just plants? What if it's plants? Does anyone talk about risks to the plant ecosystem or the possibility of modified plants that have extremely unusual properties and interact with the environment in unusual ways? We go to diamondoid nanobots and we don't talk about the things that literally grow exponentially and organically under our feet every day. It just seems like a little bit off to me. Um, and this is all to tee up that, okay, we've got a lot of possibly new forms of life coming into the ecosystem over the next few decades, and this is going to be disruptive too. So, first of all, most obviously, AI plausibly constitutes a new form of life in and of itself, which there will be extensive debates about, as we discussed. Um, will it be harmonious with us? Will it not? TBD. It'll also probably help us make new forms of life, and this will be one of the pieces of technology that comes online in the overall wave of science and technology acceleration. So, humanity is all about creating new forms of life. We love doing it. We've been doing it since the dawn of time. It was one of our first pieces of civilizational technology. We domesticated crops and animals. And we are today doing the much more sophisticated version of this in genetic engineering. And right now, this is a technology that I think we will look back on and say is in its infancy. We do relatively little with it. What we do with it is also controversial already, by the way. In the future, we'll probably, because of advances in AI, unlock much, much, much more specific ways we can modify organisms to meet the needs that we have, and we'll do it. And these will basically be, invasive species in the overall ecosystem of the world. Uh, what are the consensus positions we'll come to about what you can and can't make? Unclear. This is a challenge that seems underattended to me at the moment. Also, if we've got AIs that are doing things in the world that are acting on our behalf, that are able to take relatively free, open-ended actions. Let's suppose they're aligned with us. Let's also consider the case where they're not aligned with us. Will they design their own new forms of life with the same technologies that we've asked them to make for us to help us design new forms of life? Are humans and AIs going to be injecting strange new things into the ecosystem constantly with no plan and no coordination? Maybe. Uh, and okay, further in the sort of general theme of ecosystem disruptions, at a certain point, I hope to God we get Dyson grids and terraforming. That would be terrifically exciting. Terraforming might be one of these things that we wind up unlocking sooner than expected. So right now, show of hands, who thinks terraforming will be possible within the next 20 years? Terraforming Mars, 20 years? Anyone? One taker, two takers, three? Okay, 4. Um, and for everyone else, yeah, it feels a little bit farther away. That's like a little bit speculative. Maybe if we nuke the ice caps or something, but no one's going to do that until Elon eventually does and says, "On whose authority will you stop me?" Um, but but let's suppose for a minute that we get AI to help us figure out how do you design exactly the kind of microbe that can thrive in exactly the kind of Martian environment, and layer on a sequence of such microbes so that we inject them one after the other, and they just progressively terraform Mars and make it green. What if that becomes possible? Uh, no one's got a plan for that. No one thinks it's realistic, but we've just established that AI moved much faster than people anticipated from 2007, when everyone knew it couldn't do this, to 2025, when we're talking about AGI in 3 years. Um, it's conceivable to me that 20 years from now, we'll be saying, okay, what's the plan for terraforming? We've got the tech. And that's a very weird thing that'll happen concurrently to the social issues and the economic issues and the international security issues and the possible rogue AGI that's taken over a desert somewhere. Um, all of this will be happening at the same time. So, what do we do about it? I'd like to introduce some concepts that I think we don't talk about often enough, which is that we kind of have to have something to steer towards and some conception of how we get there. So first, let's just put it all on the board for a second and have a very rough sketch at some of the things that might happen in this century. Um, Predictions, not preferences, and I'm using the word prediction very loosely here. But let's say a lot of weird stuff happens pretty fast. So the next 20 or so years, we have the AI economy coming online, and we have to figure out how we transition from the current system with the current set of jobs to some alternative system with alternative jobs where everyone's interests are protected, everyone is satisfied, everyone has their basic needs met. At the same time as the international order is changing, where we're going from what was the U.S. centric unipolar order to, and this I think is an explicit policy goal or statement from to the current U.S. administration, figuring out how to navigate into a multipolar world order. That will be going on at the same time as possibly global conflict. And then as we get towards the 2030s, the 2040s, the 2050s, let's say other forms of technology that are more advanced are coming online. Some transhumanist stuff becomes possible. Some of the ecosystem disruptions become possible. Uh, Maybe there's an AI that is effectively a major world power, and we have mostly aligned goals with it, but maybe slightly misaligned goals with it, and we have to negotiate with it in some way. And there are very weird conditions for when we could hypothetically succeed at such negotiations and when not, that I don't think have been fully explored by folks. Maybe Elon really does become king of Mars circa the 2040s, um, and the AI personhood movement. So all these things could be happening roughly at around the same 20-30 year stretch, and by the middle of the century, we're now reacting to the changes that happened earlier, and by the end of the century, it's very unclear to me where we are. Are we at a place where humanity is happy? Are we at a place where we feel like we did right by everyone? Like the technology that we brought into existence and the regulations that we pursued and the kind of course of international action we pursued. Are we confident that that's going to lead to a good outcome when we get down to 2100? What will it even mean to be human at that point if some of us are electing for a transhumanist path and others aren't? I don't think we have answers to this, and I think we kind of need some. So, yeah, two concepts that I think of as useful: one, grand strategy, and two, theory of victory. These are concepts that I'm borrowing from the universe of statecraft and war, but I want to repurpose them here. Where uh, grand strategy, for those unfamiliar, is this concept of what sort of a strategy and a roadmap does a state have for orchestrating the instruments of national power at its disposal, and coordinating their efforts so that they ultimately add up to achieving the long-term interests of those states. And by theory of victory, this is a conception of what state counts as victory. What's the good outcome? What strategy are you going to take to get there? What do you need to enact that strategy? And how do you know that it's going to work? What argument can you put forward that it will actually work? Uh, so I think it's valuable to try to adapt these concepts and think about grand strategy for human civilization as a whole in the wake of trying to grapple with the cascade of technological disruptions and challenges that will come over the next several decades in rapid succession, uh, towards accomplishing some notion of human interests as a whole, which I think are underdefined because maybe as a species we've never really had to sit down and think hard about what it means to define human interests, but now seems like a great time to do that. And then we should have a strategy that adds up to some desired end state. We should really be thinking about and sort of negotiating about and discussing what's the good outcome. Why that one? Because if we wait too long, we'll get somewhere, and that might be then too late to do a course correction. Is it even possible to design or enact a grand strategy for humanity? Is that even a sensible thing? I'm inclined to think that it kind of is, if you squint a little bit. So is human civilization the sort of thing that could have a grand strategy? So it has many instruments of power. It has the various nation states. It has various international coordination organizations. It has many private firms that are able to make decisions and to some degree coordinate their effort, even if only implicitly through market mechanisms. So there's some basis for coordination. Um, I put a note here because I really want to drive home. I'm not talking about centralizing decisions for all of humanity, which I think is sort of terrifying, and in a sense would contradict what I think of as critical human interests. So I think of the sovereignty of nations and peoples to ultimately choose their own way as kind of a critical human interest. So overly centralizing to accomplish a grand strategy, not what I'm talking about, but more, is there a way we can set some overall heading where we have sufficient common ground to get to agreement and move in a similar direction? Um, and I'm inclined to believe that yeah, there's some basis for cooperation. So, one thing we'll probably all agree on is that humans should be the ones to steer the course of human civilization, and we probably don't want to totally cede all decision-making authority to something else, to AI, to the forces of nature. The history of human civilization is the struggle to try to exert some kind of control over nature, and I see no reason why that would stop. And in the face of a challenge that might decrease our ability to steer our own destiny, we should probably band together at least a little bit to preserve that freedom. We have common ground on protecting the ecosystem from disruptions that would make it impossible for humans to live on Earth and thrive on Earth. We have common ground on avoiding global conflicts that might result from some of these very rapid changes. And I would like to believe we can find common ground on the equitable distribution of beneficial technologies. Certainly, if there are haves and have nots, if there are winners and losers for things like transhumanist technologies, there will be conflict, and that is worth avoiding. Uh, and there's this other thing, which is if there are other powers in the world that are not human, if there are, for instance, AI autonomous major world powers, or if we wind up inventing other forms of life that become world powers in some sense, then maybe human civilization begins to have some well-defined interests relative to those others, which in the past never existed because we're the dominant species on planet Earth, but in the future we might be one of several sort of equivalently powerful species. And that is a very strange thing, and maybe people should grapple with it. Okay. So last thing, what is the good outcome? And I have freedom, flourishing, and abundance as kind of a tagline. Not totally the abundance left wing movement, but more the conceptual aspiration of abundance. Everyone should have everything that they need. Um, Towards what positive end? What'll happen to markets? I'll skip over this. Like this, you get the gist. We want the good things. We have to figure out what the good things. In the vein of grand strategy towards the good things, I want to make a few key suggestions. So obviously, all kinds of regulation and the details of all these things are going to be contentious and difficult, but there's some stuff we can probably all get behind. One, build state capacity for understanding what the hell is going on. Uh, there are not that many scientists in US government right now. There are not that many people who will be able to understand the changes in science and technology that are happening and the ways that they will drive extremely strange and exotic outcomes. We need more folks who have a detailed understanding of technology and the infrastructure of civilization to go be a part of governments and help them make choices. Jack.
I do have to ask,
Yeah.
how do you align this with the pursuit of an explicit deregulatory strategy and an alliance with the political party which is destroying this?
Uh,
How do you align this?
so I'm going to host an office hours later, guys, at around 3:30, and we're going to discuss that in depth. But I do think, at a bare minimum, everyone seems kind of okay with the notion of get more telemetry as a first step before we wind up agreeing on any other elements of strategy. Two, the community of people who do research in AI, in every other field of science, and in international security, all of these folks should be laser focused on these problems and really trying to game out what's happening. And we should be at the place where folks are actively working on detailed predictions and vetting those predictions and building conferences around those predictions. I think events like this are terrific in that respect, and there needs to be an awful lot more of it. And finally, I think philanthropy is kind of an underappreciated instrument that can be put towards potentially helping anticipate and resolve many of the potential crises of the 21st century. So we got to do this. And lastly, we do sort of need a new politics for all of this. I don't think the old politics is going to get it done. I don't think in the old politics there's any kind of language for even acknowledging half of these problems, except in the most inflammatory and confusing terms that I don't think will lead us where we need to go. We need clarity. We need to figure out how to bring people in who understand technology and put them on the stage to talk about these issues with people. Um, we need to bring technology to people to help them understand it. It can't just be something where smart people talk down at everybody else. It has to be something where we really um, get the world to understand the technology. We need to have somewhat more relaxed debates and discussions. And uh, please, dear God, we need genre savvy politicians and leaders who wouldn't get red shirted if they were dropped into an episode of Star Trek. So that is the talk. Thank you all so much. Yes, there's 4 minutes.
I was just wondering how your thinking about safety and risk has evolved as OpenAI has gone from, primarily an AGI research company imagining something that didn't exist yet to a consumer company where 10% of humanity, give or take, uses your products on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So I would say my personal thinking on safety has evolved to become more all encompassing. And also, I've realized that a lot of the things that we historically regarded as particularly just technical measures for safety, or the things that we only tried to address them with purely technical measures, um, that wasn't going to be sufficient. So when we talk about things like alignment risk, it's not just enough for a researcher in a lab somewhere to come up with an algorithm and say, I've solved it, the AI is aligned now. There's an extremely complex social and technical negotiation process that has to happen with a lot of stakeholders, including a lot of stakeholders well outside the confines of a laboratory. So I see this as just a problem that requires a lot more people to work together to coordinate to solve maybe than I did 5 years ago.
When you say that compute might be existential for states, like, are you suggesting that like Denmark might cease to exist if they don't get enough data centers in their country, or like what do you mean by it might be existential?
Yeah, I don't mean Denmark will cease to exist. What I mean is that if states don't have access to resources that put them on an even playing field in negotiations with other states, with other states, they will rightly understand that their interests are going to be met in a way that's worse off than if they had the resources. So, if you are a nation that doesn't have a substantial amount of AI compute at your disposal 10, 20 years from now, when AI is part of how nations routinely make critical decisions about how to allocate resources, how to, monitor their economies and how to make trade decisions. If you don't have that compute, you can't make a decision that's as refined as your counterparty in a negotiation. So you would perceive that as an existential risk to your interests.
Uh, okay. Yeah. I just wouldn't use as existential that way. Like, I agree they have less leverage. I don't think they will cease to exist.
Fair enough.
Do you think OpenAI should be spending a lot more time and money on trying to solve a lot of these problems?
I think everyone should spend a lot more time and money trying to solve these problems.
I mean, I think this is a little bit pat of blaming the politics. I just want to say, like, I think the tech companies, I think a lot of people who work in tech, in VC and labs and so on, are extremely naive about politics. And it goes both directions, right? Like, I talk to people who are like, oh, like, well, obviously we're going to need a UBI, so therefore we'll get one. Like, that is not how politics works, right?
Yeah.
And so I just like, I mean, I've talked to people at OpenAI who say things like that. And
Well, on this, I agree completely in that there is not going to be a magic button we can press for something like UBI and expect there to be a magic silver bullet policy. And I don't think that we need a politics that's going to create silver bullets. I just think we need a politics and a discourse that is better at explaining these issues to people, because I don't think in the current environment we're even well equipped to have the conversation about why is UBI not practical overnight. The tech folks don't understand it, and the policy folks don't even understand why the tech folks want it. So we've got to get to a place where there's just more clarity and a better discussion that helps people understand what's coming and why.
So we're at time now. So let's please thank Josh.
Thank you all so much. Office hours at 3:30.